Sevens.
The best thing that ever happened to me. I can slip into a 7 or a 9.
I tried other programs, but this is the only one that worked for me.
Is weight loss your New Year's resolution? Weight Loss Clinic can make it happen. Now you can save 50% on every introductory program. Call now for your private consultation.
This special offer must end Friday.
BCTV, we're giving it all we got.
Good morning. There's been so much double talk about this on-again, off-again wolf hunt that even the wolves are confused. And when somebody says they're going to downsize the wolf population, that's just like laying off civil servants. What they mean is that to protect the big game industry, wolves must be slaughtered. Now, that may or may not be the correct decision as far as I know. Very difficult to get hold of Brummett. But Pamela Martin was up in the North Peace River area with the experts, and there she is going over an area in which there may be as many as, who knows, in the whole of the North Peace River, 4,000 wolves and at least one moose. Maybe there's more than one. And it's been very difficult, I believe, because of the lack of snow cover from this, you can see, to get the wolves together in packs. Now, here's a question that our intrepid Pamela Martin gave to John Elliott, the man in charge of the kill.
What are you planning on taking?
80% of the wolves in our project area.
How many is that?
Well, we're still working on inventorying the wolves in the area. There's minor fluctuations from year to year. We could be looking at there being up to 500 to 800 wolves in the area, so we're talking up to 80% of that number.
There's killing going on all the time. The wolves kill the game, or we kill the wolves. So it's a matter of which you want, wildlife or wolves.
That statement by Brummett was made to Pamela up in Fort Nelson, I think it was, of Fort St. John. And that was before he seemed to be muzzled, because it's impossible to get Brummett on now. This man here, John Elliott, who is a regional wildlife biologist for the North Peace, was called back hurriedly, and since he came back, there has been no kill. But I've brought along another expert this morning, friend of mine, Cyril Shelford, sometime trapper, guide, big game guide, rancher, social credit cabinet minister, who knows whereof he speaks with regards to wolves, and he'll be here as my expert on at least what people think in that part of the world. Also in the studio this morning, I have Pauline Jewett, the NDP MP for New Westminster-Coquitlam. And she's going to give us, I trust, an assessment on Trudeau's peace plan and how people might feel about Trudeau's very blunt attitude that nobody knows what the American response will be, whether the use of limited nuclear weapons in Europe. It's a big subject. But off the top this morning, the man without the gun today, he'll get his gun and maybe his semi-automatic weapons when he goes back up. And that's Elliott and Cyril Shelford after the break. For 10 years, John Elliott, Dr. Elliott, has been a regional biologist in the North Peace. Is that correct?
That's right.
You're the man that kills the wolves.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I'm the project supervisor, field
First
supervisor.
question to you this morning. Did you bring this much talked about secret report which Brummett apparently wants to hide?
There's a lot of reports that have come out on wolves, both within our organization and by other scientists in North
Is there anything in these
America.
reports that we wouldn't want to see?
No, and we've now got together a stack of documents that are going to be available to people that wish to read them.
Laundried, perhaps. No, but that's not your problem. You can't talk about policy. You merely do what you're told. Is that correct?
Well, I suppose that comes to all of us.
How many wolves in the North Peace River?
We're talking 3,000 to 5,000 wolves.
Let's take 3,000 wolves. So therefore, you would want to kill 2,400 of these wolves on a program to bring game and the wolves into balance.
If we were after the entire North Peace area, at the moment we're just talking a smaller project area. Quite a
Okay,
bit
you're
smaller.
talking about Musquash, is that right?
Deshodi, right.
Deshodi. Now, you said that there are between 500 and 800 wolves there.
We have some newer census data now, and it looks like we're talking probably pretty close to 500.
500. So therefore, you want to kill 80% of the 500, correct?
Right.
400 wolves.
Approximately.
Is that a yearly target or a target in the first attack, the first wave?
We want to keep them down at that 20% level for 5 years.
You want to reduce the current wolf population from 100% to 20% for 5 years.
That's right.
What are the statistics and documents you have that back this large kill?
Well, there's a lot of studies that we've done. We've looked at wolf densities and the status of the game herds. I'm talking moose, sheep, elk, caribou, and other animals. We find where we've got more wolves, we have game herds which are in poorer shape, declining more rapidly. We've looked at reducing wolves in a couple of experimental programs, and we find that where we reduce the wolves, the game herds immediately turn around. They stop declining, they begin to increase.
I believe you, as it happens, but let's talk about the 500, right?
Okay.
If you've got a count, newest data of 500 wolves in this area, give me the name again, Musquash
just call it Musquash.
Musquash area. How many elk, moose, caribou, and deer do you have in that area? Because you've a count of one, you must have a count of the other.
For certain. It's one of our richer areas. That's why we're working there. And so the numbers of our game populations are a little higher than they are in other areas. We're talking on the order of 10,000 moose, 3,000 elk, 500 caribou. Which animal did I leave out? Mountain sheep?
Yeah.
A couple of thousand mountain sheep.
Okay. What's the calf survival rate, which I believe is the proper question to ask you, now in these big game animals?
Okay, we're looking on average at calf or yearling survival. Some species, the predation on young animals takes place over a longer time span. We're talking on the order around 5% in many cases.
In other words, 95...
5% recruitments.
What does that mean, 5%
Wow.
recruitments?
5% of the population, let us say at 1 year of age, if we're talking 1 year, is young animals.
In other words, if you're losing, are you losing to wolves any young animals under the age of, say, a year?
Oh yeah, for sure.
How many?
Well, you start out at perhaps 50%, and you end up at 5%. The reason we use the term recruitment is it's directly comparable to the mortality. If your adults are dying, which they are in big game animals at anywhere from about 10 to 30% per year, depends on species and a lot of circumstances.
That's normal death.
And you only have 5% recruitment, you just subtract the two and it tells you what's happening to the population.
In other
it's
words,
going down at the difference.
I don't quite understand them, Cyril, on that. Is he telling me, I'll get this from both of you, that only 5% of all the calves survive?
Well, what he's telling you is that the game herd soon goes down. It's the same as cattle management. If you have 10 calves and 20 or 30 of your older animals die off, you're soon going to have no cattle herd at all.
Let me try you again. Does that mean that only 5% of the calves survive?
No, it's a little higher than that. We're talking perhaps 10% of the calves surviving.
Who kills the other ones, apart from nature? Wolves.
Well, wolves are part of nature, of course. They're all part of the sequence. They're just taking the biggest proportion of them.
Wolves are taking and you've got all kinds of data to show that the wolves are ripping off the young animals, but don't they normally go for the halt, the weak, the lame, and the calves?
Well, calves are an easy part of the population to take. That's the problem. If they were taking only old ones, no problem.
Settled. Do they only go for the halt, the weak, the lame?
I would say it's plain BS. They go for everything. And I followed herds of game animals when I was trapping in my early years. And at one time we followed 15 deer. And they followed them for about 4 miles, and they killed 14 out of the 15. And we looked at all of these animals, and they were all healthy and fat and in good shape. It's a complete myth when people say they kill the sick and the weak. They do kill them, but they kill everything else too. They kill any animal they want. And I've seen wolves pull down the largest bull moose I ever saw. In deep snow especially is when they really get at them, when the moose breaks through the snow and the wolves can run along on the crust.
What made you change your count? When you were interviewed by Pamela, you said between 500 and 800, which would have given you a kill of 640, right? Now you've downsized your estimate, and now you're only going to kill 400. Supposing there only are 400 wolves up there, you'll kill a lot.
No, I indicated it could be as high as 500 to 800. We've been looking at a steady, while the game herds have been going down, we've been looking at an increase in wolves during that whole period. So naturally, from year to year, it's pretty hard to know what number you're dealing with.
Right now,
last year we felt we had in there about 450. This year it looks like it's about 500. There wasn't a really large increase.
Up to now, you've killed how many? And is this the first wolf kill in the Musqueam Valley area?
Right.
It's the first one.
You bet.
How many have you killed up to now?
35.
That's 27 and 8. I must ask you this question. Do you shoot them with semi-automatic weapons from helicopters?
Yes, we use shotguns from helicopters, either
Pump guns.
pump or semi-automatic.
So is that the best way to kill wolves?
It's the most humane, most effective.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I must say I'm from Missouri, coming from a bush area of central British Columbia. I doubt if they can control wolves with helicopters. And I base that on experience in the Soviet Union, where last year they killed 60,000 wolves. And they still haven't got around the problem of losing many of their reindeer herds in northern Russia. I think in an area where John is from, I think they can. But I don't think it can happen in an area in the central interior. We had an experience right on my brother-in-law's ranch where they made 3 helicopter trips after a fresh kill, fresh snow on the ground where it was easy to see the tracks. And they never got one wolf in 3 trips, and they flew nearly 100 miles each way.
Is that your experience?
No, we've done experimental programs in the past, and we've always achieved our objectives.
You said there are 10,000 moose in that total area.
In that small project area.
In the West-Coquitlam?
Right.
10,000?
Right.
You're overrun with moose.
That's our richest wildlife area. That's why we're working there.
Got so
there
many.
Used to be more, keep in mind. It used to be more.
You've got so many that you shoot the moose for bait for the wolves.
Well, there was a ridiculous story in one of the tabloids, local tabloids.
Yeah.
It had an anonymous informant, a nice solid source there, which made some suggestion along those lines. Completely ridiculous.
In other words, the report that you and somebody else shot moose from the air for bait is false.
Completely ridiculous.
It's false.
False.
Absolutely untrue.
In the last 10 to 11 years, I've worked for the Fish and Wildlife Branch. For humanitarian reasons, weak or injured animals, we've killed 3 moose in 10 years.
Not as wolf bait.
These are ones with broken legs, broken ribs.
Necessary kills.
Right.
Essential mercy killings.
Correct.
More with John Elliott, the regional wildlife biologist. And I want to get some gutty stuff from you too, Cyril Shelford. You don't live up north anymore.
I live up north usually about 4 months in a year.
You're from Utsa Lake?
Yes, that's where I was born.
After the break. Well, in this Musqueam area, we've got 10,000 moose, 3,000 elk, 500 caribou, and 2,000 sheep, right?
Approximately.
Well, you're lucky, aren't you?
Hey, that's quite an area. Why bother about the wolves up there? How many more moose do you want?
Well, we used to have a lot more. The problem is widespread, of course, up there. We're concentrating on this area because this is our prime area. You put your greatest effort into the area that'll give you the largest return.
Oh, just to get one thing clear, if your proportion of the 500 kill, we'll say 400 for the sake of guessing, because you're just guessing on the count, aren't you?
Well, it's an estimate, obviously.
An estimate on the
there's
count.
limits.
That would be this year's kill.
That's the target.
And that'll take you a whole year to get them.
Oh no, we're talking about the winter.
And you're using volunteers.
Not in the control program.
Do they? But if anybody who shoots a wolf now, it's free game on wolf, and you can keep the pelt, which is worth $250.
Well, there's an open season on wolves. People can hunt them by conventional means. The fur market price for wolves is about $75 average.
$75 for a wolf pelt.
Correct.
What do you think of this safari that the people up in the north are putting on with $100 a ticket with a free hunting safari to Zimbabwe? Is that the kind of thing that you would support?
Personally, if I was running it, I would say no. I would have the first prize as some sort of a conservation program of either salmon enhancement or game enhancement. I think it would...
you're still a politician.
Yes, maybe I am, but I think it's the right way to go. I mean, that's the first thing I think all people in the rural areas want to see is game first.
What do the people up north want to see in relation to this wolf kill, Cyril Shelford?
They want to see a control program. They saw the results of the program during the 50s and 60s, where the game populations went right down. For instance, where I used to hunt, there was 2,000 caribou in the Treesmere Park. Now, that caribou herd was cut down by wolves, because you practically no hunting in those days, cut down to 12 animals. Now, Fish and Wildlife closed the season and brought in predator control, and it was nice to see the game animals spring back.
Do you know of that one? Do you know the history of that one?
That'd be before his time, but he may have read about it.
Down to 12 animals in Tweedsmuir Park. Now,
that was the official count of Fish and Game, not my count.
Right, no.
And then they bounced back to the 2,000. Now, following that, when I was in government, we set aside 500,000 acres of Tweedsmuir Park circle area as a conservation area with no hunting. And there was 2,000 caribou in that area at that time. And I used to go up every year taking pictures and such like, 'cause I like seeing caribou. I never shot one in my life, but I like caribou. Now, the caribou stayed there for 6 years after we declared it a no hunting area. Then the wolves moved in, and the last count Fish and Wildlife had was 50 animals. Now, there's a few moved in from the Quesnel herd recently, and so there's a few more there now. But that's why I feel very strongly, I don't want to eliminate the wolf. They're a nice animal. I want to see a reasonable control where there's a balance. And in 1953, I got in touch with the Swedish Game Department to find out how they managed game in 53. And that's when you used to sit upstairs.
Right.
But at that time, they were harvesting 3,800 moose, and they sent me a full report of how they managed their game. And their last sentence in their letter was, remember one thing, there is no game management without predator control. It's the same as ranching.
All right, let me get back to the local issue. What do you think of people like Watson, you know, Bleeding Heart, just a second, talking about bringing in Bo Derek, Bridget Bardot, George C. Scott. Look in the camera and tell Watson what you think of he and the likes of him. He can't do it because he's a civil servant, but you're a free man in that aspect.
Of course, if you want a good story, you normally bring in someone that doesn't know anything about the subject. And so many people have been doing this over the last while. And of course, George C. Scott and the rest of these fellows know absolutely nothing. But they've read the books of the Folly Mowat myth and Grizzly Adams and the Walt Disney stories. And the knowledge of game today is less than at any time since man swung a stone axe. Because there's so many people living in a city compared to how many live in the country.
They've been brainwashed by Walt Disney, Folly Mowat, and other ill-informed people.
Yes, and I feel very strongly about this group that is talking about turning away tourists. I work with a hotel association, and I'm very interested in tourism because it's likely one of the areas where we can employ a lot of people. And it's complete sabotage of the economy when people do those sort of tricks.
Hysterical sabotage of the economy by people like Watson.
Yes.
And you're quite blunt about that.
Yes.
You make no bones about it. Now, so what's the choice for those in the north and for the social credit government? Give me the two options they have.
It's very simple. We either decide that we want game, and if we do, we turn it over to people like John to take care of our game. Or we take the Watsons and the Clements and the people that don't know anything about the subject, And we say, no, we'll leave it to nature. But let's take a look at what nature really does. For your information, when Simpson came to Fort St. James in 1806, there was no game in the Fort St. James, Prince George area. They traveled from Fort St. James down the Stewart and the Chaco and the Fraser, and they never saw one game animal. This followed, according to the Indians, there was a heavy wolf period. And half the Indians starved at Fort St. James, and this is all recorded in the Hudson Bay Record.
Yeah, Simpson
now, my
journals.
dad came in 1908, and there was no game. And he lived on porcupines for the first winter he was in the
Were
country.
there wolves?
Yes, you'd been a large concentration of wolves. But like any other peak, the game population builds up. Then the wolves build up like they are in the peak.
Okay, but I want you to give me a simple
Then the game
choice.
crashes and the wolves die too.
Simple choice. It's either big game or wolves.
Right.
Either hunting or wolves.
Limited control, I think, is a better word, to keep the wolves within balance.
You would go for that too. It's either balanced control of the wolves, take out 80% of them where they're in surplus, or no big game. Is that right?
I think we're talking the wolves going down as well. If we do nothing, we're going to end up with a situation where we have very little game, very little wolves.
That is
I've got a
correct.
suggestion for you.
That's what I was trying to say, that we end up with nothing. And we have then 20 or 30 year periods with no game and no wolves.
You've certainly made a convincing case, and I would suggest to Tony Brummett that he quit and that Cyril Shelford take the job if they want to carry on with wolf control.
I think Brummett, though, in fairness to him, he is doing the right thing.
He won't talk about it.
Well,
he goes and hides in a corner. I had to bring you in this morning as a non-politician, non-civil servant to tell me what you think of it after the break. Straight question to Dr. John Elliott. He's in the unhappy position of being a civil servant. He does very well, by and large, I would say. Have you yet received instructions to go back north and continue the wolf kill?
For certain. We're going back onto the wolf program probably in the next few days.
So it's full speed ahead for 80% of the 500 wolves in the Muskwa Valley.
That's right.
Yeah, and how many will you kill a day?
Conditions have been very poor. It's the warmest winter, the lowest snow winter
Will
we've
you
had
use
for a long time.
helicopters all the time?
Right.
You will?
Right.
Isn't it better and simpler to use cyanide?
Well,
you're an expert. You've poisoned wolves, I know.
No, I haven't personally. I've traveled with a game conservation officer that did, and in my experience, I liked it because you can see what you did. And they always put it out in the middle of lakes where the small animals didn't come out. They covered it with a moose hide. I had so crows and anything else coming along wouldn't pick up the little bait.
Until later on.
No, and then they would put the...
That's cyanide we're talking
Yes,
about.
we're talking about cyanide, and they'd put the little baits underneath the moose hide, so when the wolf come along, he would grab the corner of the moose hide and pull it off, and then they'd eat up all the baits underneath.
What happened to 1080?
1080 is used now in agriculture areas in response to wolf problems.
Drano is another thing they use, isn't it?
Never heard of it.
You've never
heard of them using it, no. First time I've heard it this morning.
So we won't be using 1080 up there?
No. Poison use is controlled by the federal government, not by the provincial government, and the province is not licensed to use toxicants for wildlife management purposes.
But it's full speed ahead as soon as you go back to Port St. John. Fort St. John today.
Right.
You'll be starting killing wolves again tomorrow.
Well, I can't say the exact day we'll start, but the program will start again.
As soon as possible.
Right.
Now, there's a guy whose ears have been burning. He's had his time, but we'll give him a shot this morning. You would call this fella a bleeding heart, and you say he's uninformed. And then that will bring up Paul Watson of the Sea Shepherd Society. I see you've cancelled your plans, according to yesterday's Vancouver Sun, Paul Watson, to go up and harass the legal wolf killers.
No, Jack, that wasn't an accurate report. We will be having a crew leaving within a few days.
What right have you got to harass civil servants who are carrying out a proper predator control program approved by the government?
Well, they say it's a proper predator control program, but they don't have any data to back that up.
Haven't you been listening to?
They should be releasing this report, which, as far as I'm concerned, flies in the face of 35 years of intensive research into wolf behavior.
What about the 60,000 they're killing in the Soviet Union? What about Alaska? What about the Yukon? What about the wolf kill programs here?
I'll answer that, Jack. 60,000, that of course is coming from Shelford. I don't know where he gets his data on that, that we can't even get correct answers out of Victoria about what the population is.
We just got them this morning.
That's today's estimates, but I don't think if we can get correct answers out of Victoria that Victoria knows what's going on in the Soviet Union. Besides, the Soviet Union kills people in Wales and illegally, and I don't think that that's a good comparison.
Really, I don't know how you can say that Elliott is anything less than a sincere, well-informed expert who spent 10 years in that country, fully trained biologist, and he tells me straight up, and I believe him, that 10,000 moose are there, 500 wolves is the latest estimate, and they're going to kill 80% of them. Now, it seems kind of reasonable, because I've seen what dogs can do to sheep far less wolves. Well, what is your information, or are you just on a kick to raise money?
Well, I can't believe that John Elliott wouldn't challenge Shelford's ridiculous story that a pack of wolves reduced the population of ungulates from 2000 to 12. That's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, there's been experiments in Michigan. We have a laboratory, Ile Royale, where a stable wolf population has been observed for years, living in harmony with a stable moose population. In fact, this is
where is this?
Ridiculous.
Where is this?
Ile Royale.
Where's that?
I
can't agree with you at all. Matter of fact, I disagree with your entire scientific argument there. The bulk, if not all, of the recent technical work that's come out all suggests that wolves control the populations of their prey. The Ile Royale situation that you referred to, once the wolves started killing each other just a few years ago, the so-called balance that existed there suddenly disappeared, and the moose have been multiplying at a fantastic rate. The wolves all along were holding the moose down in Ile Royale.
Well, how can you suddenly become an expert on wolves when you've just recently become an expert on seals?
Well, I don't pretend to be an expert on wolves. I'm a wildlife conservationist, and...
But isn't there some wildlife that must be controlled? Rats, for instance. If you've got rats in your house, you'll exterminate the pests.
In fact, the best control for rats and mice are in the wild are wolves and coyotes.
And warfarin around domestic areas. Yeah, you know that, Paul. Anyway, you haven't made much... Tell him off, Cyril. Come on, tell him he knows nothing.
No, I don't want to tell him off, Jack. I realize that he certainly doesn't know much about wolves, and he should spend March and April out in a trapping cabin to see what happens.
You've been a trapper?
I've been a trapper, and I've seen it in Tweedsmuir Park, where the wolves will chase caribou off the high country, which is the best feed area, down into the timber, where they either nearly starve to death or they get killed off.
Is that correct, John?
Well, wolves eat a lot of game, no doubt about it.
There's no question different things happen in different areas.
By the way, show me that. You brought in a picture this morning of a sheep. Where is it? There it is there. Now, who did that to the sheep?
That was a wolf attack in the Kispiox that killed 6 sheep. And, of course, this one, like all others, had to be destroyed.
If a wolf attacked your sheep, would you shoot the wolf or shoot the sheep? Paul?
I don't have any sheep.
If you had
we're
sheep.
talking about wolf in relation with wildlife, not with domestic animals here.
Is domestic animals not a problem anywhere in the north-central interior?
The domestic animals normally are only a problem once the game population is pretty well killed out up in the mountains.
Is that right, John?
Oh, I think it's a little more ongoing than that, but it probably does accelerate.
Okay, Paul.
We never had any problem with the game animals all during the 50s and 60s in the central interior.
When the wolves were down?
Once the wolves were down and the deer were just bouncing back, there was deer all over my
One last question to Paul. Why didn't you object to the controlled wolf predator programs in the Nimkish Valley and elsewhere on the Vancouver Island?
I think there's been objections from the very onset, Jack. I think that this is just more blatant, and we got involved in it because it's so blatant now, and we felt that, you know, this... protest program needed to be beefed up, and that's what we're good at, and that's what we're doing.
When are you going up to Fort St. John?
We'll be sending a crew up this week.
And you're going to stand and face the shotguns and semi-automatic rifles between the government officials and the wolves if you can. Is that correct?
That's the intention, yes.
When do you appear in court in Quebec?
Oh, not for some time now. But I should point out, Jack, you know, when Shelford says that he's a trapper and therefore he's an expert on wolves, you know, we've been dealing for 10 years with marine mammals, and every fisherman we come across says that he's an expert on marine mammals, when in actual truth we found very few fishermen are that knowledgeable about the behavior of marine mammals at all. So I think that he fits into the same category.
Yes, of course, if you spend your time on the trap line with snow on the ground, the only true story that's really written is a story in the snow. You can see the wolves chasing various game animals. You can see the blood spots in the snow that indicates the wolves have caught up to them. And finally, you find the kills.
Thanks, Paul.
Well, two final questions, Jack. Just one thing. How many wolves were trapped last year, and how many hunting permits were issued in that area? That's also a factor in the moose and caribou populations.
Trapped, shot, disposed of last year?
There's wide open season during the trapping period for trappers to take wolves. They've probably taken a half a dozen or so in that area, doing their best. There's a hunting season for wolves in that area. They've probably removed a dozen or two.
That's all.
How many moose have been hunted? How many moose have been hunted in that area?
In that area, it's a more attractive hunting area than some because it has more game. We're probably talking around 300-400 moose out of that
What's the value of that to the local economy?
They're worth plenty, both be they taken by resident hunters or be they taken by non-residents who bring in foreign exchange.
A lot of money.
Well, I say eliminate the hunting and save the wolves, and that's our...
Okay, that's a good question. If you eliminated the hunting, would that in any way enable you to stop wolf kill?
Well, it wouldn't stop the game decline. The hunting is restricted to a very narrow component of the population. We're talking mature or older males of the species. The wolves are taking them all with strong preference for the young.
Thanks, Paul. I've no doubt we'll see you on the news.
Yeah, I'll see John Elliott maybe next week up there.
Much obliged. We'll go to the phones now with John Elliott, the man in charge of the wolf kill, and Cyril Shelford, who heartily supports a controlled predator program.
That's right.
That means just kill just enough wolves,
yes,
to keep them under control.
Yes, I think we've had enough experience from Sweden and other countries that we can carry out a control.
I understand you're going to write a new book in answer to Farley Moore called Never Cry Tears for a Wolf, after the break.
Save our game.
Well, it's certainly gone very toughly this morning. Watson doesn't like you.
I don't think so.
No.
They were running around with signs of the last pesticide control here in Poison Cyril. Signs galore.
Poison Cyril?
Yeah.
That was what really annoys me is this garbage down in Seattle. Bloody Canada kills again. That really annoys me.
It does me too, because tourism likely is the only industry we're likely to expand in the years ahead.
Yeah, under this government, it's probably the only industry that's likely to survive, far less expand. I've got a room full of people in Fort Nelson, and the spokesman for them is Alan Radford. Are you there, Alan?
Yes, sir, I'm right here.
Okay, well, speak up.
Yeah.
Say your thing.
Yes, Mr. Webster, I'm right here.
You got to turn down that television set or it will drive you around the bend. I can hear the 7-second delay in the background.
Okay, turn it down.
Turn it down.
Okay, it's down.
Okay, say your piece, Alan.
Okay, the first thing Mr. Webster would like to bring to your attention is the caption under Dr. John Elliott was wolf hunter.
Yeah.
Dr. John Elliott's not a wolf hunter, he's a game biologist. Kind of a cheap shot.
Well, that was my cheap shot. I'd like to keep things simple and dramatic.
Okay, our second question, sir, is what is the Sea
Shepherd?
What is the Sea Shepherd Society going to do with this money they collected? Is it for wolf control or is it for Mr. Watson's defense in Quebec?
No, he's already been convicted in Quebec, and I'll give Paul a clean bill of health in that he'll spend the money to buy helicopters and harass you people in Fort Nelson, try and stop the tourist industry, and harass John Elliott, the regional wildlife biologist. Right? So that's the object of that. Now, are you totally in support of the wolf kill?
We are 100%, sir.
Now,
6 other gentlemen in the room here with me from Fort Nelson watching your program.
How many of them are guides?
None.
None of you is a guide?
No, sir. We have one ex-guide that quit guiding 2 years ago. The rest are just cross-section of the citizenry.
And what do you say to people like Watson and Greenpeace and the rest of them? Are they just a bunch of bleeding hearts?
Mr. Webster, there are a bunch of people that are uninformed or else have a completely closed mind to the subject and just will not listen to reason. The answer is, if we could do it, is have every one of them up here and let them have a look at the problem firsthand. I'm certainly sure they'd change their mind.
How much money does the big game bring into the likes of Fort Nelson or Fort St. John?
Mr. Webster, I wouldn't even want to hazard a guess, but I know it's the livelihood of quite a few gentlemen in this area.
Uh-huh. And yeah, what do you want Brummett to do? To stick to his guns?
Yes, sir. 100% we want him to stick to his guns.
Okay, anybody else there that wants to scream at me?
Well, I'll just ask him, but I'd like to ask Mr. Watson one more question.
Yeah.
We're going to have a mosquito control program this spring. Does he want to come up and protect them, too?
Not a bad idea. Mosquitoes are part of the ecological plan. Yeah, that's good. Now, let me speak to one guy at random in your...
Just a minute here.
Come on.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead, sir. What's your name?
Bill Woodward.
Bill, what do you think of Elliott and the government's plans to knock off 400 wolves in the Muskwa River Valley?
I think it's a hell of a good idea. The gentlemen know what they're doing.
Why? Why is it a good idea?
Well, there's the game is depleting. Every year you go out there, you see less and less moose tracks, caribou tracks, stuff like that, and just all kinds of wolf.
Okay.
3 this year already.
I'm much obliged. There was, and give my regards to your 5 buddies. And who knows, I might see you one of these days.
Right on, thanks a lot. Sure, come on up. You're welcome. So is everyone else. Let them come up and see what it's like.
But Pamela Martin's the only reporter tough enough to survive up there. I think I'd last about a day.
Well, I want to go out with these Sea Shepherd people or the Project Wolf. I want to go out with them when they live with the wolves, because I've been trying to hunt them for years and we can't get close to them.
In other words, a tough game to catch.
You better believe it.
Much obliged.
Thanks very much.
All the best. Any more from the Peace River? Go ahead, please.
Hello, is this me?
That's you, sir.
A comment I wanted to make was, I believe proper management, it seems to be, from where I sit in Vancouver, it seems to be necessary. It makes sense. I have a few things that I'm curious about, and that is when a hunter comes in from, say, West Germany, the United States, England, whatever, with a lot of money, and he pays for an outfitter to take him in, makes his kill, cuts off the head, leaves the carcass. Now, a lot of guys are saying, hey, no, we eat that carcass, you know. That's not true. I want to find out, is there some kind of management from the government to make sure that all of that animal is being used and not just feeding ego of somebody that...
I've got the question.
Yeah, okay.
What's the answer to that,
Yeah,
John?
under our new act, it's now mandatory to utilize game meat. And in the case of foreign visitors, of course, it may not be practical for them to take the meat back, although certainly Americans, people from south of the border, in most cases take it back. But overseas, it's not practical. It's often eaten by the hunter when he's there. He gorges himself for his chance on game meat, and sometimes leftover meat is taken to Indian villages and the like.
A big German tourist, big game hunter, and his lederhosen just cutting off the head and leaving the body there is not an accurate picture.
No, that's right.
I should think. What do you say to that, Cyril?
Well, that's quite true. I was a guide for over 20 years, and I never left any meat that the hunters shot at all. Most of them wanted to take it back, as John said, too, especially to the U.S.
Okie dokie. What's the next call? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, my question is, how much of the game is being killed every year by hunters in the area?
Well, he gave the answer. You said 300 or 400 moose out of the population.
Right. And that's a more heavily hunted area. If we take the whole northeast, we're talking wolves taking probably in excess of 50,000 animals a year. We're talking hunters taking 1,000 to 1,500. Wolves are taking them over a wide segment, lots of calves. Hunters are taking just a small group of animals. They're taking males, older males.
When we're talking about the northeast, we're talking about an estimated population of 4,000 wolves.
That's right.
So 4,000 wolves will bring down, one way or another, 50,000 animals of all kinds.
That's
Calves.
a conservative number,
Oh, that's the kind of figure that you need to buttress your case. That's a justifiable figure on a good extrapolated estimate.
For sure, you could come up with much higher estimates. There's a lot of recorded cases in the scientific literature of overkilling, excessive killing. This is a very conservative
Dr.
number.
John Elliott tells Webster with the 4,000 wolves in northeast British Columbia, that'll take down 50,000 animals. Do you accept that?
Oh, certainly I do. I get back to the Tweedsmuir Park where there is no hunting for all these people that are saying the hunters are killing them all. There is no hunting in that circle area, and yet the moose goats, caribou, pretty nearly all gone. There's very, very few.
Another segment with John Elliott, regional wildlife biologist. Giving me hell in Fort Nelson for calling you a wolf hunter. My, they're sensitive up there.
They're loyal northerners.
Yeah, but just don't use the word downsize, please, or I'll upchuck. After the break. Well, at least the people from the north are having the complete say this morning, so let's go to the central interior to Williams Lake. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning.
Morning, speak up.
I am an ex-game guide and still am a trapper, and it's really nice to see a couple of men like you have on your show this morning. And I hope they carry on with their program. I was born and raised here in the Chilcotin country.
Right.
And we have a growing problem with wolf predation right now among the game and ranchers' cattle.
How bad is it?
I beg your pardon?
How bad is it?
Well, it's a growing problem. It isn't really bad yet, but it's growing into a problem.
And you fully support the program here?
Definitely so. There's a couple of things I'd like to say. Mr. Shelford is right when he says wolves will kill any and all game. The only thing is one thing I'd like to say is that they're probably the most selective hunter in the woods.
The wolf is?
The wolf is the most selective hunter in the woods because he will kill the weak and the sick only for fun. When he goes out to kill something to eat, he kills the fattest and best animals for himself.
You mean grade A steaks for the wolf? Is that right, Cyril?
Absolutely.
Let me ask Cyril that.
I would say, generally speaking, yes. It depends on the time of the year, though. If it's summer and fall, when there's no snow on the ground, I have to think they mainly kill and eat what they kill. This is not true when you get into the March-April period when the crust is on the snow.
Do you agree with that?
Most of the cases of excess killing or surplus killing, as it's termed in the technical literature, occurs in the wintertime. Seems to be the easy time to kill larger
If you have a male and a she-wolf, what's their litter in a year? Total litter in a year?
We found with our autopsy work on wolves that average litter size is about 6 pups.
How many times a year?
Just once a year.
Just once a year. Good, and much obliged, old guide from Williams Lake. Smithers, BC. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack. I'd like to make 4 points, if I may.
Yes.
I support the wolf hunt 100% in the northern regions of BC. I think it's a lot more humane than poisoning them.
Right.
Secondly, if they were advocating a complete
elimination
of wolves, I think I would sell my weapons and join Paul Watson.
Right.
Greenpeace has come up here and hassled the law-abiding people in Spetezi. If they want to change the law, let them go to Victoria and do it. And my 4th point is we have renamed Farley Mowat, and he is now Hardly Know It.
Hardly Know It, Farley Mowat.
Thank you very much. I'll hang up and listen.
I'm much obliged. Actually, I had him on the air years ago. Well, you don't disagree with anything he said.
No.
Now, I've got to watch my time this morning. Look for calls from the Peace River, and I'll go up and down the line on a little ballot. Now, those on the telephone, please listen carefully to the teacher this morning. I'm going to ask you one question. Are you in favor of Buana Brummett's wolf control, which has been well explained this morning, not by him, but by his regional biologist, or are you against it because the tears are running down your face at the thought of a wolf predator being put to death? Now, let's try it. Now, I hope you listen. Are you in favor of the wolf kill? Are you there? Are you in favor of the wolf kill? You said no, you're not.
What I'd like to know is how many of these wildlife animals are being chased out by development, land development?
Okay, are there any subdivisions in the Musqueam Valley?
You know, the whole country, of course, has some development now. We're talking a very undeveloped area, very undeveloped.
There's nothing, really. You can fly for hours over forest area. Can you not?
That's right.
Are you for or against the wolf kill?
I'm for it.
Thank you, ma'am. Are you for or against the wolf kill?
I'm definitely for it.
Thank you, sir. Are you for or against the wolf kill?
I haven't made up my mind, Jack. I've got 2 quick questions, one for each of your guests.
Make them quick.
I beg your pardon?
Oh, just hold on a second. I've got to Have I got a call here from Nova Scotia?
You most certainly have.
Whereabouts in Nova Scotia?
Still, Nova Scotia.
What's the name of the place?
Elmsdale?
Elmsdale. What the devil are you doing watching this program?
I'm watching your two men, and neither one of them know what they're talking about.
What do you know what you're talking about? You're in Nova Scotia.
I have been where you are, and I've been a lot further.
All right, tell me.
The wolf only has more babies, as you want to say it, if they have a population and they have food, and they see the livestock as more food, therefore they have more babies.
What's that got to do with it?
It has a hell of a lot to do with it.
Are you against the wolf kill?
You don't want to believe it. If they leave the wolves alone and left them in their own territory, they wouldn't have a problem. You are also conducting a survey to people that they don't even know anything about wolves.
Well, what
are
do
you
you
against or for a wolf kill?
What does Sea Shepherd or Greenpeace know about wolf kills?
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I can't say that I support Greenpeace. That's because if you go a little bit...
Okay, just a minute. What's your name?
My name is Pauline Charles.
How old are you, Colleen?
I am 47.
What's your address?
My address is Box 413, Elmsdale.
Elmsdale, Nova Scotia.
Right. And if they tell me something...
What size are you?
I beg your pardon?
What size are you?
I'm 5 feet tall and I weigh 90 pounds.
We'll send you a small Webster T-shirt as our first call from Nova Scotia.
I want to tell you something.
What?
That you're not be able to you can't catch wolves in traps, as they're too bloody smart for man.
Is that right, John?
You can reach them by
Pretty
the
hard
air.
for trappers to
And
get.
in the Arctic,
Pretty
they're
hard.
shot as a sport.
Well, so a moose shot as a sport, old gal. Anyway, I'm going to say...
I want to know something else. How many business people can have their competitors killed? Leave that one. Ask the people that. And that's exactly what you're doing.
Fair enough, but I'm still going to send you a T-shirt even if you don't like me.
Oh, I don't mind you. It's those two people who are condoning or helping the...
Oh, they're a couple of stinkers.
Yes, they are.
Thanks very much, Colleen.
Bye.
Bye. Our first call from Nova Scotia.
That's something.
Braylon, go ahead, please.
Pardon me?
Go ahead from Braylon.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question about...
Oh, damn, I forgot.
Does anybody can...
Do speak up. What happened to you?
Oh, yes, I'd like to ask the question about, has anybody considered the grazing lands of...
Never mind that. Tell me, are you for or against the wolf kill?
Well, I hope that it's quite an equal balance, but...
Well, you're for it if it's properly controlled. Go ahead, please.
Jack, you've missed a point here. How much big game has our trains in the north killed?
Oh, what about the CN slaughtered on the tracks, which they can't avoid?
Thank you, Jack.
That's a good question.
I was in the interior 2 years ago, very heavy snow year. In the Peace River country, we don't have that kind of snow. We've never had a serious problem with trains or
There is
cars
one
on the
in
highway.
Prince Rupert.
Yes, sir.
They did have a problem 2 years ago, definitely.
Yes, they have a real problem. I know Fish and Game tell me that they lose as many as 700 or 800 some years.
Yeah.
But
Can't avoid that.
No, it's very difficult. In Norway, they actually have lights that come on automatically when a moose is crossing. That's easy in a narrow valley, but it doesn't work worth a
Are
darn.
you for or against the kill?
Against.
Against the middle.
I have one thing to say. How have the wolf and the prey population lasted so long
Can I answer?
without man's wolf
Okay, John,
control
how
program?
have the
How can
wolves-
we still have them?
Okay, you can
We've
talk
been doing
to
it for centuries.
you can talk to the old timers. Perhaps Cyril here is an old timer. Any of the old timers who've had some bush experience, you go back prior to the control that the government did, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and there wasn't much wildlife. There was very little wildlife. That's the natural situation. Very little game, very little wolves in that kind of an ecosystem.
But nowadays, if you've got a lot of wolves, they go for the game. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Are you for or against the wolf kill? For.
For the program, because Dr. Elliott is doing the same way in the wilderness as the SPCA is doing in cities.
Sure, that's a good point.
Killing the surplus population.
Uh-huh.
And that's absolutely essential here.
In the SPCA is taking all the dogs from the cities.
Yeah, if you didn't spay dogs and cats here, we'd be totally overrun by the little beautiful pets. Go ahead, please.
Hi.
Are you for or against the wolf kill?
I am very much against it, sir, and I think these hunters should take the guns and put them where the sun don't shine and pull the trigger.
That's very generous of you indeed. Thank you very much. It's a somewhat illogical answer to the question. Why are people so rude? I think you bring it out in them, Cyril. Are you for or against the wolf kill?
Hello, it's me?
That's you.
Yeah, I certainly am. Not against. I'm for the wolf kill because I've hunted in the area up north, and I'd just like to state this, like I've hunted at the Cluachese Lake area, and I've seen about 40 cow moose, and maybe 3 or 4 calves with this number of cow moose, and there isn't a calf season up there for hunters, so somebody must be taking these calves.
Who's taking the calves?
He's put his finger on the problem. We're losing these young animals to wolves. There's not enough calves coming in to replace just natural mortality of adults.
That's the point. I mean, I had to report that only 2% of some calves, caribou calves, had survived. You don't think it's as low as that?
Well, there could be some herds that low. That's a little lower than most.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to wrap it up, and I want to thank you, John Elliott, Dr. John Elliott. Sorry I called you a wolf hunter. I upset the people in Fort Nelson. I didn't upset you. Regional wildlife biologist. And you're going back up today, and you're going to start killing your proper control number as soon as you can.
That's right.
And you're not asking for volunteers to join you.
Definitely not.
It's going to be a government kill.
That's right.
And for you, Cyril Shelford, you're all for a properly controlled wolf kill to protect the environment.
Yes, I would say, though, I would want to see it extended into other areas of the province, such as like the Kispioc Central Interior area, where they've lost a greater percentage of their game than they have in the area where John Elliott is hopefully taking care of the problem.
Very grateful, John. Very grateful, Cyril. Back with Pauline Jewett on Trudeau's peace plan after the break. There doesn't seem to be any doubt that Trudeau's peace mission, regardless of his basic motives behind it, maybe to go out in a blaze of international glory, seems to have had considerable effect. But no more so than when he apparently said in a panel discussion in Switzerland on Saturday that he was not sure that a US president would risk nuclear war to save Western Europe from a Soviet invasion. That makes you think, why bother with testing the crews in Canada? So, little as I know about it, I'm glad that Pauline Jewett is here this morning, external affairs critic for the NDP, New Westminster-Coquitlam. And you were in the conference in Stockholm, were you not?
Mm-hmm. First week of the conference.
Give me your assessment of, as non-partisan as you can be, of Trudeau's behaviour, his plan, and the prospects of some measure of even tiny success.
Enormous question. Trudeau is quite right about the implausibility of using nuclear weapons in NATO. What he said has been substantiated by several other people, Admiral Falls, Paul Warnke, and so on. They're simply saying that the likelihood of being the first to use nuclear weapons is probably about 0. So I agree with him on that, and so do a lot of other people.
Are you telling me if there was an invasion of Western Europe with by conventional forces, from if there were, and you know, I don't suppose it's threatened at the moment, is it?
No, no.
If there were, the US would pause before they used the nuclear deterrent?
Oh, undoubtedly they would. But what Trudeau has done, however, by saying that out loud, which other people have been saying, going back to Lord Louis Mountbatten, what he's done, however, by saying it out loud, is to have pulled the rug right from under the whole strategic doctrine upon which NATO rests. And why, I ask myself, did he not? Last December, when NATO was meeting in Brussels, and when NATO reinforced their strategic doctrine, namely that they would be the first to use if against a conventional attack, you know, why didn't he then, within NATO, raise the whole question about reassessing the whole doctrine of deterrence? You see, what has really happened, I think, Jack, is that Trudeau began his peace initiative talking about getting the 5 nuclear powers together.
Right.
That was the keystone of his initiative. Now, that got shot down. And I think quite rightly shot down, because 95% of the nuclear arsenals are held by 2 superpowers. And you've got to get them to the table before you're going to get China, for example, who has a very tiny nuclear component. And so then he started looking for other initiatives or substance within his initiative when that was pretty well shot down. He discovered at Stockholm, well, not that he was there, but Alan McKechnie was there the first week. And I was really rather distressed by this, that literally nobody was talking about Trudeau's peace initiative. It didn't come up in any of the foreign minister's speeches. It wasn't discussed in the corridors, you know, because other people are taking even stronger initiatives. It may be that Mrs. Thatcher's going to Hungary is more effective than Mr. Trudeau's visit. The point is, however, that I want to make is that many leaders are taking initiatives to try to get the two powers back to the negotiating
But whatever he's
table.
doing, if he brings up these backroom questions for public discussion, that's got to be good.
Well, no, then I think what he's doing now is really taking another leap and bringing out into the open something, you're quite right, maybe should be brought out into the open, but because he didn't even introduce this question at the last NATO meeting, which was in Brussels in December, because he has agreed to test cruise missiles, which of course are part of the first use strategy. He has really, it seems to me, caused other nations, quite rightly, within the NATO alliance to say, well, you know, why didn't you raise this before? Why are you doing it now? Is it just for sort of political gain or to keep your own initiative moving?
Don't they say to him too, why the hell are you testing cruise missiles in Canada?
Well, why indeed, as I mentioned, when he's already agreed to do things like that to support the doctrine. And so it seems to me that although he's absolutely right in the substance of what he's saying and has been supported by many others, including many military people, they just do not see the likelihood of using nuclear weapons because it would be the beginning of a Holocaust.
Well, let me go back to the beginning, and amazingly how ill-informed I am on this particular topic. You mentioned NATO's original strategy. Is it their strategy that if attacked by conventional weapons, NATO would strike back with limited missiles?
They wouldn't necessarily, but the whole concept of the deterrent is that they, holding the nuclear weapons, not signing a no first use policy, means that they are threatening the other side. If you attack with conventional weapons, we may respond with nuclear weapons. And therefore, the idea is they deter the other side from attacking.
Well, what Trudeau's statements about not sure if the U.S. would respond with a deterrent nuclear on a Western European invasion must give fear and horror to the NATO chiefs, because that cracks at the very whole underlying contract, is it not?
Yes.
Aren't the Americans supposed to be there with the umbrella to say, if you step across that line, we'll nuke you?
That's the whole concept, the strategic doctrine upon which NATO rests. Now, as I say, it has been up for questioning, chiefly by people who have now retired. You will find Admiral Falls, who are free to speak. The difference is that Trudeau is not yet retired, and he's speaking as the leader of one of the countries. And there's some feeling, if you really want to question this doctrine, and it certainly is up for questioning, why don't you do it by saying no cruise missile testing, by saying within the NATO alliance, we've got to re-examine the whole strategic doctrine.
Somebody pulled out a clipping for me this morning, Thursday, November the 24th, 1983. Guy called General Rogers, Supreme Commander of NATO. If I sense, he says, that I, as the American Supreme Commander, am going to have to resort to nuclear weapons, I will send an early notification message to NATO's political leaders. So they've got the finger on the trigger, and they alone. Is that correct?
Actually, the U.S. alone when it comes to cruise and Pershing IIs.
Yeah, I'm talking about an American general in charge of NATO. He's got an American finger at the behest of the president on the trigger.
That's right. Exactly. And what he's simply saying is that, no, he is saying, if I think that they're going to be necessary, then I will inform. But of course, it's ridiculous, because there isn't that kind of time involved.
To hark back in a mean way to the Grenada invasion, I trust that General Rogers knows the postal code for the NATO leaders. More with Pauline Jewett. Jeez, after the, who cares about wolves? After the break. To Pauline Jewett, NDP MP and external affairs critic for our party. Silly question, perhaps, Pauline. Do we have a tripartisan foreign policy, roughly speaking, between the Liberals, the NDP and the Tories? Do you all take much the same attitude?
It's very difficult to know. We, as far as the NDP goes, we have not supported cruise missile testing. We have not supported Canada's participation in what we feel is the escalation of the nuclear arms race. And therefore, we are at odds, so to speak, with both the Liberal and Conservative parties.
On that issue?
On that issue, and well, on issues generally about Central America, we feel that the East-West component that the President of the United States keeps putting into it should be much more strongly resisted by Canada than the Canadian government does.
But on a no first strike policy, all three of you.
No first use. Well, it's difficult. I was just going to say, in the case of the Conservatives, if you listen to their external affairs critic, you get a position very much in favor of the so-called nuclear deterrent, the strategic doctrines of NATO, in fact, sometimes even more hawkish than the American president. And yet, on the other hand, the leader of the Conservative Party has asked Joe Clark, who is a moderate on these issues, to be his sort of ambassador for disarmament. And indeed, Joe was at Stockholm at the same time I was, and is looking at ways and means to reduce the nuclear imbalance.
Is it possible for you to interpret, as a political observer of some particular note, remembering the Trudeau of '68 when he sneered at NATO and wanted, in effect, to pull out of NATO, showed a massive indifference, really, in foreign affairs until the last 3 months? What's he up to? Looking for a retirement badge of honor, a job in the United Nations, or the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, I don't think he'll make the latter. He has periodically shown an interest. He made a famous speech on North-South issues about 8 years ago.
Oh, yes.
And now, where's that? He made his famous strategy of suffocation speech at the UN in 1978. And then dropped the whole thing. You see, the problem with the Prime Minister is that he still does have that dilettantish quality of sort of pirouetting behind the Queen, wanting to give his particular kind of jolt of political energy and then drop it.
Like he behaved in the asbestos strike in Quebec, where he didn't turn up for the court appearances when he was a young lawyer.
Yeah, it goes back a long way.
Pirouetting behind the Chinese Premier, too, Zhao, the other day.
I didn't see that pirouette.
Oh, yeah, we had a big picture of that, you see.
But I'm not sure, you see, where the Conservatives stand on foreign policy issues either, because they are quite sharply divided within their party between quite right-wing people and much more moderate ones.
Was the Stockholm meeting a success in any way? That's where Gromyko and Schultz got together behind closed doors after the blunt words in public, was it not?
Very blunt words in public, and it really was just a buzz right around the whole conference center. The fact they spent over 5 hours, they can't be calling each other names the whole 5 hours, so that was sort of positive, Jack. By the way, one of the things that struck me, that rarely does strike me, because I'm not particularly conscious of the fact that I'm a woman, and but I certainly was struck by it there. Every single foreign minister was a man. The great majority of the delegations were men. And outside the conference were the women. Women from Greenham Common, women in peace groups in Europe.
Greenham Common, that's the British
anti-cruise people. And it was quite so startling, indeed, that the Swedish newspaper had a whole story on it, and on the front page. On the inside, you had men basically, sort of, as I said afterward, sitting under this mushroom cloud, moving soldiers and toy tanks around. And outside, you had almost entirely women protesting the whole nuclear arms race on both sides.
Things haven't changed much, have they?
Well, you know, there is some feeling that there has to be an injection of the political will and energy that is there in many men, of course, but predominantly in women these days.
Oh, no, I'd endorse the woman quotient and foreign ministers and international affairs. We might get a little bit more humanity injected.
Well, it really did hit me.
Instead of the tribalism.
It really did.
Well, we're not in any grave danger at the moment, are we?
Well, I think we are.
There
are no negotiations going on now. We have a presidential election coming up in the United States. A lot of people feel that the Soviets will want to get back to the bargaining table before Reagan is re-elected a second time. That he might be even tougher in the sense of, I don't call it tough, but resistant to any arms control negotiations in a second term, and therefore it might be wise to try to get arms control negotiations going now.
Tell me this silly question again. Are the Russians as... there are some days when I think I'm more liable to trust the cold-blooded tactics of the Russians than the emotional hysteria of the Americans. Would you favor that?
Well, it's not only emotional hysteria, but it is the inaccuracies as well. Another matter that Trudeau brought up in Davos, Switzerland, was the an increase in the sophistication of U.S. nuclear arms. and the increase generally in their power, their nuclear power. And the Undersecretary of State for the United States sort of denied all this.
Right.
He said it was a myth. Well, it's not a myth.
Oh, he wasn't the pipsqueak, no. It was another guy who was a
He's the Undersecretary of State, Mr. Dam. And he denied that there was any increase in the nuclear potential of the United States.
He said the tonnage had gone down.
Well, tonnage may. It's got nothing to do with it. The smaller, the subtler. The smaller, they're more powerful. The smaller, they're more mobile. And I find that kind of statement coming out of the United States really bothers me. For example, also, they've been saying for years that the Soviets have had this massive buildup all through the late 70s and early 80s. Last December, the CIA, of all bodies, made a report to Congress saying, sorry, their estimates were wrong. There had been no buildup. You know, and so what worries me about the United States, perhaps more than anything else, is that they state these things as being absolute truths, that there's been this massive buildup and therefore we've got to respond with a massive buildup. And then we find a few years later that there hasn't been a massive buildup.
I see Trudeau was heartily endorsed on Canada AM this morning by Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, well, apparently he was in Toronto, I guess.
Does that mean anything?
Well, I thought maybe when you said to me it was Carter, I thought perhaps it was Cardinal Carter. I forgot for a moment. But sure, it means something when you look at the Democrats in the race in the United States. This issue of whether or not the United States is really helping to reduce nuclear arms in the world, this issue, it seems to me, is going to be perhaps the most important in the fall elections.
Life or death for all of us. Don't think about it. Questions to Pauline Jewett after the break. Just a short capsule, please, on what you thought of that mighty invasion of Grenada by 6,000 American troops. Wasn't that comic opera?
6,000 American troops versus 600 Cuban handymen.
That's right. Enough said, isn't it? Piece of nonsense, the way they did it. They could have done it with a Lance Corporal and half a section. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster. Pauline Jewett, there's 2 points I'd like to make. First of all, I believe Pauline Jewett has a problem. She would like to support the Prime Minister in his latest position, but basically she cannot because it would be political suicide, so actually she's doing a two-track tango. Second point.
All right, let's deal with that one. That's a good one.
Oh, that's very nice. A two-track tango. Wow. But, you know, I cannot tell a lie, as they say. I think the Prime Minister's position is right. It's the position taken by Paul Warnke, Robert McNamara, and many other people. And so I, you know, just because it's Trudeau saying it, I can't say he's wrong. But on the other hand, I wish he had been saying this in the councils of NATO. I wish he had been saying it in Washington. You know, why suddenly bring it out now?
That's the point. Second question, please.
All right, let me address that point. They pose the question why he did not state his position at the NATO conference. I think each of you is forgetting the underlying reason for accepting the cruise testing. I'll remind you that it started as a veiled threat to keep the Soviets at the bargaining table on front A and bring them back to the bargaining table on front B. B, I should say. Now, it was an American objective and not the NATO objective to bring them back to the table.
Okay.
And since it has not worked, Trudeau felt that it would be worthwhile now to kneecap that theory and go on from there. I'll hang up and listen.
Okay.
Well, the testing really is not relevant to this particular issue. It's the question of deployment in Western Europe. And the Americans thought that if they deployed, then the Soviets would negotiate, quote, seriously. The Soviets warned all along that if deployment took place, they would not continue to negotiate. The two came to a total impasse, and really Canada had very little to do with that. What the Prime Minister is trying to do now, however, late in the day, too little and too late, is to try to bring them back together.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I think like with the Russians and the Americans, missiles are really not the problem. It's that, like Carl Sagan and Strangelove proved that you don't have to have missiles, you just have to explode them. But do you feel like maybe with the Washington and Moscow, to get them to talk, you may as well go talk to trees first? And would you have any ways of yourself getting them together again, personally?
I'm sorry, I missed part of that question, Jack, but let me just say that there are many leaders of many countries in Western and Eastern Europe and the neutral and non-aligned countries like Sweden and Yugoslavia who are working literally day and night, including East Germany above all others, to try to bring the two superpowers together. If we don't get the control and eventually the elimination of nuclear weapons, they know as well as we know that it could be the end of the world.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, I'd just like to correct Pauline Jewett regarding if, you know, they decided to come across the, you know, to the west, you know, then would Britain or France use battlefield nuclear tactics? She said that Maggie Thatcher has definitely said that they will. There's no hesitation. You know, they would have no choice but to, because it's the only way they'd ever stop them.
Is that a fact?
Well, the caller is talking about something called battlefield nuclear weapons, which we haven't really gotten into. I was talking about what are generally called the intermediate range nuclear weapons. And actually, Britain has no control over battlefield nuclear weapons. What Britain has is what they call their own strategic deterrent.
They've just got the big bomb.
Yep.
No, they've got the cruise now, though, haven't they?
That's not a battlefield weapon. Sorry, we mustn't get into technical details.
Is a cruise not a battlefield weapon?
No.
The means of deployment is one thing, okay? The warhead is another. They've got the capability of using battlefield nuclear weapons in Britain.
You want to get into that?
Well, Britain has the capability of using its own independent deterrent. And the likelihood of it doing so, it seems to me, is as remote, you know, as anything can be.
Noisy. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack. Good morning, Ms. Jewett.
Good morning.
I'd like to bring up something that I think everybody has missed the point. You realize it only takes one to start a war, and in the strategic defense of Europe, if the Russians think that they could win a nuclear, whether or not, or win a conventional war, whether they could or not is immaterial. It only takes one to think that they can. And I think...
Okay, I've only got a second to finish with a very short question. Does it make sense for the Americans to invade Western Europe?
For the Russians?
Russian, conventionally.
It doesn't make sense at all. And nor do I think it's likely. You know, people forget that the Soviet Union has 70,000 troops in Czechoslovakia and in many, many other countries.
Then I must stop you. Pauline Jewett, NDP MP, New Westminster, Coquitlam, many thanks. After the break. Canada's top health economist Bob Evans from UBC on Webster tomorrow morning at time up yet? And Donna McPherson's coming to give tips to the oldies. But I'll be here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. precisely. The wolf kill in great detail on Check at Midnight.